Hi everybody and welcome to Mark Overanalyzes Film. Today I will be overanalyzing one of the all-time greats, 1942's Casablanca. Casablanca's process of creation was famously, or infamously, chaotic, confused and contentious, but it was written by some combination of Julius Epstein, Philip Epstein, Howard Koch, and Casey Robinson, based off a play written by Murray Burnett and Joan Allison, and it was directed by Michael Curtiz. Now, what to say about Casablanca? I decided to do Casablanca when I realized that it was released 80 years ago this month, and it reminded me of my first experience of watching the film. It was probably about 15 years ago, and I had recently also watched another all-time classic, Citizen Kane, which in truth, at the time, young Mark found a bit of a chore. But I thought I should catch a few classics while I was at it, so I somewhat reluctantly sat down to watch Casablanca. And Casablanca was brilliant. A 65-year-old film at that point that was just utterly compelling. I rewatched it again about 5 years ago with a friend who had never seen it. I had really hyped it up, so I was a little concerned when we started. But when it finished, my friend simply blew out his cheeks and uttered, "Well, they don't make them like that anymore." Casablanca is just that kind of film, the film that films can aspire to be. And yet, I don't know, is it really 2001? Or The Godfather? Or Tokyo Story? Or The Rules of the Game? Or Citizen Kane? Apparently, Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman hated it during production. And it does do stuff that it probably shouldn't, like have an extended flashback in the middle of the story, or have characters say out loud things like, "I don't really know why I'm doing the thing I'm doing," or barely leaving one location for long tracks of time. So, if it is just that good, what makes it just that good? If it really is so brilliant, truly one of the all-time greats, what is the quality that makes it so? Well, with all that in mind, first I'll look at the fundamental features of the protagonist, and then I'll go through the main story beats by looking at the sequences of the film. Then I'll talk about the main things I learned along the way. So, let's begin with the 5 questions about the protagonist. Question 1, whose story is it? Or, basically, who is the protagonist? Well, maybe the most famous protagonist in film history, in fact, certainly at least in the conversation. The protagonist here is Rick Blaine, a world-weary cynic who has ended up running a cafe/casino on the periphery of a world at war, and pretty much of life itself. Question 2, what is his life dream? Life dream here refers to what it is that the protagonist wants or is aiming to do when the film begins and the story has yet to properly start. What is Rick's life dream here? I mean, he'd like to return to America, we're told, but really that's not in his plans. His life dream, or plan at least, is really to keep doing what he's doing, to keep his head down, his nose clean, and hope that someday he really will be as numb and cynical as he purports to feel now. Question 3, what is his want? Want here is what the character is trying to achieve in Act 2 of the film, from the moment they really begin their journey until the moment they are at their most defeated. As such, it is a SMART goal in that it is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Now, I have to say, to my surprise, I find this a little hard to pin down, and in fact, I find it hard to find who to pin it to. Is the want Rick's, or Ilsa's, or Victor's? Well, Rick does want at least an answer from Ilsa as to what happened, and you could talk me into that being the want really, but he's a bit late at coming to that objective, and he's not terribly active in pursuing it. And what Ilsa wants is a little unclear as well, or at least conflicted. There's something though which is not unclear, from minute 25 until minute 88. Victor Laszlo wants the letters of transit so that he, and especially Ilsa, can get out of Casablanca safely. So I think our central tension of Act 2 is something like, will Victor get the letters before something befalls him? Question 4, what is their need? Need is the human quality or piece of wisdom that the character lacks at the beginning of the story. Now, we are definitely on surer ground here, I think, and as I'll get into later, I think this is where Casablanca really does rise to greatness. When we meet Rick, he's heartbroken, and as a result, he's given up on life, on people, and on the fight. His need is to re-embrace that fight, to renounce his cynical detachment from the world. Question 5. Do they get what they want and or what they need? So, at minute 88, right before he's arrested, Victor asks Rick to take Ilsa away from Casablanca. Now, you could debate whether this is exactly what he wanted or not. From just after the midpoint, it's pretty clear that Ilsa's safety is his first priority. But what is not up for debate is that Rick most assuredly gets what he needs, as we will get into. Okay, now that I've attempted to answer the 5 key questions, let's have a look at Casablanca's sequences. There is normally, but not always, 8 sequences or stages in a film. A sequence is a combination of scenes that are tied together by having a single overriding dramatic question or tension, and they tend to be between 10 and 15 minutes in length. A good way to think about it is that every 10 to 15 minutes, the audience should be on some level asking themselves a different dramatic question. Now, there's one more thing that I want to get into here. On the one hand, Casablanca is by far the oldest film I've covered so far by about 30 years. And as far as I know, Hollywood really got into the structural thinking stuff in the 70s in a big way. On the other hand, the whole point is that story structure is meant to be universal. So how does Casablanca look from this standpoint? Pretty damn structured, I have to say. Now, as far as I can figure, Act 1 runs up until minute 25, which is textbook. Then Act 2 is a little over an hour, which is extremely common. And finally, Act 3 is a little short by modern standards at 14 minutes. But we still have our 2 sequences here. And frankly, I think they were just way better at wrapping things up back in the day, as I'll get into. Anyways, let's get going. Act 1 has our first 2 sequences, and the first one is always pretty much life as it is. Now, one of the many things I love about Casablanca is that it moves. So we begin right out the gate with what you could call the inciting incident, the event without which our story as it is would not happen. Now, you could probably convince me that the inciting incident is Ugarte giving the letters to Rick 12 minutes in, or maybe even that it's Ilsa walking into Rick's gin joint at minute 25. But right away, news comes in that 2 German couriers have been murdered on a train, and this is the event that sets things in motion. It's why Ugarte has the letters in the first place, and it's connected to why General Strasser is in town. It also sets up that Casablanca is a place full of danger and vultures everywhere. So, evil Nazi Strasser arrives and meets maybe my all-time favorite character in film history, Captain Louis Renault. Is he deplorable? Yes. A snake? Absolutely. An Englishman with an English accent playing a French regent in French-occupied Morocco? Clearly. But I love Claude Rains, and he is the definitive charming cad. And one who makes the whole film work, really, I think, as we'll see. Now, here right away, Louis sets up the central tension for our first act. They know who killed those Germans, and they're going to apprehend them at Rick's tonight. Then, at that, we cut to Rick's tonight. And there's a lot of scene setting here. A great pianist/entertainer Sam, desperate people hawking wares, rich snobs confused as to why they can't get an audience with the proprietor, an eccentric barman, and of course, Rick. Now, you might notice we meet Rick doing 2 things here. Playing a tactical game, chess, and rejecting Germans, the snob trying to get into the private room for gambling. We are told immediately that Rick's is a studied neutrality, and it defines his character immediately. That is storytelling. And then we meet Ugarte, who is our first character to explain that he's doing something a little odd. He tells Rick that he's got friends at Casablanca, but for some reason he only trusts Rick with the letters of transit. And at that, Rick has the letters, and we've also learned that Ugarte is the murderer, and therefore is going to be apprehended by Louis. And so we wonder, will Rick get involved when the time comes? We have a real tension now, and so 12 minutes in, we enter sequence 2. So, Rick hides the papers, and then Signor Ferrari appears to attempt to buy the bar. Now, there's something that really starts here that is all throughout Casablanca, really, and you might regard it as hokey, but personally I kinda love it. I'll discuss this more later, but the characters basically talk in theme at times. Ferrari wants to work with Rick, and Rick will have none of it. So Ferrari makes fun of his isolationism approach. Let me say here then that in Casablanca, Rick is the United States, or at least how the United States would generally like to have seen itself in 1942. And we will see this over and over again. And, coincidentally, Rick is also someone who we are consistently, as an audience, told is the man. Men want to be him and women want to be with him. And so we have Yvonne, who we know is desirable because the barman is in love with her, upset that Rick seems to have discarded her. Rick sends her home because he pretty much gets to tell everyone what to do, and outside he meets Louis. Now, I think their extended conversation here, Rick and Louis, is really important for both obvious and slightly more subtle reasons. For one thing, we learn a lot, right? We learn that for some reason Rick can't return to America. He is also told that Ugarte is going to be apprehended and warned not to interfere. He is further told the next big tension of our whole story. None other than Victor Laszlo and his beautiful partner will be arriving in Casablanca, and Rick is not to help them. But also, you might notice that Rick and Louis clearly respect each other, or at least each other's adroitness. And that's why Louis is warning Rick. He is both fond of him and aware of his capabilities. And that's what makes Louis such a great character. He professes himself to be master of his own fate here, but he's stuck like everyone else. He's relatively powerful, but more than anything, like most cynics, he's just bored. So the two make a bet about the fate of Victor Laszlo, and at that, the police have a man to arrest, or kill, or whatever. So Ugarte is cornered, and he runs for Rick. Now, Rick can't really do anything, but he makes sure that that's exactly what he does. Ugarte is dragged away, and as we come to close our first act, Rick asserts for the second time now that he sticks his neck out for nobody. He really is going to have to go on a journey if this position is going to change. And there's one more thing here before our journey really kicks on. Louis introduces Rick to Strasser, and the party have a chat regarding Rick's history and potential allegiances. Now, this scene makes sure our hero and our villain meet early on, and it sets out Rick's cynicism and world weariness again, but it also fits a particular story structure purpose to my mind. Unusually, Casablanca's third sequence barely features Rick at all, but as you may recall, the third sequence is normally characterized by what we term refusal of the call. The hero is called to action and initially rejects it in some way. And so here, just before Ilsa and Victor walk in the door and our second act begins in earnest, Rick insists he plans on staying out of the matter.
Yes, don't worry, we are not going to broadcast it.
Oh, my eye's really brown.
You will forgive my curiosity, Mr. Blaine. The point is, an enemy of the Reich has come to Casablanca, and we are checking up on anybody who can be of any help to us.
Well, my interest in whether Victor Laszlo stays or goes is purely a sporting one.
In this case, you have no sympathy for the fox, huh?
Not particularly. I understand the point of view of the hound, too.
Rick will stick his neck out for nobody, and that includes Victor Laszlo. But Victor Laszlo is about to walk in Rick's front door with a lady of clear but mysterious import. And so we end Act 1 and we enter Act 2. Act 2 begins with Sequence 3, the first attempts to solve the problem. Now, I have to admit I'm in two minds here as to the main tension. On the one hand, you could argue that Rick is off screen and not really doing much. This sequence belongs to Victor and Ilsa. If the heart of tension is someone wants something and is having difficulty getting it, the dramatic tension really is something like, will Victor find out what happened to Ugarte? On the other hand, I'm really wondering throughout this whole time when Rick is going to meet these two. And something like that tends to run through all of Act 2, with an A plot and a B plot running alongside with their own tensions. Anyways, Sequence 3 tends to begin with what we could term the what's the plan scene, which basically tells us what Act 2 will look like. And so here, we immediately see four things all at the same time. Victor is looking for Ugarte, and therefore the letters of transit. The Germans are trying to intimidate Victor. Louis is trying to keep roughly in with everybody. And finally, Ilsa appears to be concerned about this Rick fella. This is our second act in a nutshell. And so Victor and Ilsa agree to meet Louis and Strasser tomorrow morning, and the party disperses. Victor heads to the bar to chat to his new contact, where he learns 1, that Ugarte has been arrested, and 2, that there will be an underground meeting tomorrow night. So his tension is now resolved. It's time to get to the end of our sequence. Ilsa calls Sam over and utters the most iconically misquoted line in film history: "Play it, Sam, play as time goes by." Reluctantly, Sam does, and Rick is soon sprung back into action. He comes over and sees Ilsa, this woman who will, despite himself, reawaken something in him. And so, seeing Ilsa is our protagonist's first unconscious move towards his need, or his acceptance of the call. Whatever happens now, Rick will not be staying out of this. In fact, Louis will remark within 2 minutes, "Ricky, you're becoming quite human." The party soon breaks for the night, the couple soon leave, and whichever tension we've gone with, it's been answered. And so it's time to begin sequence 4, the greater attempts to solve the problem. And here is one, actually 2 of those things that Casablanca probably shouldn't do, or maybe shouldn't really work. One of the first things I was ever told not to do as a writer was do not have your protagonist sitting around feeling sorry for themselves. And yet, here we are with Rick, sitting around feeling sorry for himself.
Sam,
Yes, boss.
it's December 1941 in Casablanca. What time is it in New York?
What? My watch stopped.
I bet they're asleep in New York. I bet they're asleep all over America. Of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, she walks into mine.
Second, we have a big, long flashback sequence. Rick, suddenly human again, stays up drinking to numb the pain associated with the experience. He tells Sam that he's waiting on a lady, and so before we head back in time, we've been given attention to ponder. Will Rick be visited by Ilsa? At that, we see the pair's romantic history, the fact that even then there was a certain air of mystery between them, that Ilsa seemed to have something she wanted to tell Rick but couldn't, especially on their last day together, and finally, that Rick was left standing at the train station in the pouring rain with nothing but a short note of goodbye. But at that, the lady reappears in Rick's cafe. Unfortunately, by now, Rick is in not the best shape, and in the midst of just outstanding levels of self-pity, does not let Ilsa explain anything, as he's far too busy implying she's a prostitute. Ilsa leaves, and Rick passes out. Just top marks all round, Rick. Now, I think at this juncture we have another mini sequence leading up to Casablanca's midpoint, because Ilsa appeared, but she never actually got to tell Rick what she was going to tell him. So now I'm wondering some version of the question, will Rick find out what Ilsa wanted to tell him? But first, we have our B-plot to attend to. Victor and Ilsa have to report to Strasser and Louis, but it's worth pointing out, I think, that Casablanca is once again keeping us just enough in with Louis so we don't turn on him. As we approach the midpoint here, which will shadow our climax, Louis points out to Strasser that he marched on Berlin with the Americans in 1918. He might just be on the right side after all. But anyways, he's not that much on the right side as he plays along with Strasser to intimidate Victor and Ilsa. Here, the couple learn that Ugarte has clearly been murdered in custody and the stakes are very much life and death. They leave and Louis tells Strasser and us the next step of their plot. Victor will try the black market, which means Ferrari. And as it happens, Rick is already at Ferrari's. And again, the stakes are being upped here on both sides. Ferrari promises to make Rick a fortune if he provides him with those letters of transit. So Rick certainly has options. But he spots Ilsa alone, he heads outside to meet her, and we get Casablanca's great midpoint scene here. Rick's first unconscious move was seeing Ilsa again. Unfortunately, becoming human again wasn't an easy process, but here Rick now apologizes to Ilsa, in his way at least, and eventually learns the truth, that Ilsa was married to Victor when she knew him in Paris. Then Ilsa walks off.
You can believe that if you want to.
Well, I'm not running away anymore. I'm settled now. Above a saloon, it's true, but walk up a flight. I'll be expecting you. All the same, someday you'll lie to Laszlo. You'll be there.
No, Rick. No, you see, Victor Laszlo is my husband. And was, even when I knew you in Paris.
Rick has made his first conscious move towards his need here. He's left his comfort zone, tried to do the right thing, learned that Ilsa and Victor have a deeper connection than he realized, and perhaps has begun to see where he sits in this picture. This is our midpoint, and we've answered our sequence tension, and so we enter our sixth sequence now, Casablanca's honeymoon sequence. The honeymoon sequence is so called as, having made their first conscious move towards their need, the protagonist begins to experiment with that need, and things generally start to go well. And you'll notice here that as soon as we've had our midpoint, we have a foreshadowing of our climax, which is quite common. Victor tells Ilsa that he can get an exit visa for her and she should leave Casablanca without him. And Ilsa refuses. They will leave together. Now, Ferrari expressly states here that he tells Victor and Ilsa something that cannot benefit him, that Rick has the letters of transit. This sets up our next tension. Will Rick give them the letters of transit? But also, in his book story, Robert McGee regards this moment as a plot hole. But I don't really snag on this decision by Ferrari. I do think Ferrari's a shark, but sharks keep moving. He's made his play for the letters and didn't get them. It's a matter of interpretation, but I think Casablanca does a really great job with the likes of Ugarte, Louis, and Ferrari of showing, these guys as sleazy grafters who are stuck and bored. This allows for a certain kind of chaotic energy as they bounce around, mostly just trying to entertain themselves. And that's really great for story. And also, at the same time, their immorality and or amorality is a great foil for Rick, our protagonist. Anyways, we're soon back at Rick's that evening and all the main players turn up. Most importantly for our story shape, though, we have a beautiful young Bulgarian woman approach Rick. We learn that Louis will give her an exit visa if she sleeps with him. And especially because she's married, she's considering it. Now, I think this is really important for a few different reasons. For one thing, this is the honeymoon sequence and Rick is about to make a sacrifice, stick his neck out, and help another couple leave Casablanca. He's not there yet with Ilsa, but he is experimenting with his need. But also, considering Rick says, stuff like, someday you'll understand, to Ilsa in our climax, I think it is worth pointing out here that this young Bulgarian woman being in charge in her relationship does at least some kind of balancing out, with the sexual politics side of things in the story. Of course, having this young woman talking about sleeping with someone else isn't exactly easy for Rick, so he helps her, but there are limits, at least at this stage, to his magnanimity. He is approached by Victor and asks for the letters, and he refuses at any price. He tells Victor to ask his wife why, and you've got to hand it to Casablanca for one of the great cinema protagonists. Rick is a real piece of work. So it's safe to say Rick has met the limits of his embrace of his need thus far, and we've now resolved our tension, so it's about time we move into the next sequence. But there's one more incredibly iconic thing here. When the men return to the bar, the Nazis are singing Watch on the Rhine. Victor springs into action and commands the band to play La Marseillaise, inspiring the entire cafe into a spirited rendition that the Nazis cannot compete with. Bear in mind here that Victor has just been told that Rick will not help him escape and has implied a relationship with his wife. But Victor is a hero, a leader, and a model of the things Rick needs to become. It's a great character to have as the other person in a love triangle. The Nazis don't take too kindly to this kind of inspiration, of course, so they command Louis, who is shocked to discover that gambling is going on in here, to close the place down. While they're at it, they also swing by Ilsa and inform her that they're basically going to murder her and her husband. So Rick has refused to help Victor, his cafe has been closed down, and the Nazis might be planning on murdering his one true love and her current husband. Things have taken a turn, and the stakes have been raised, so I guess it's about time we get the hell out of the honeymoon sequence. And so, 75 minutes in, we begin sequence 7, the bridge from the honeymoon sequence to the low point. Now, Rick has told Victor to ask Ilsa why he won't give him the letters, but really I am wondering, if Rick won't give the letters to Victor, will he give them to Ilsa? So, Victor asks Ilsa about it, and I love how accepting he is of whatever his wife did. And you might notice here that this is the most intimate scene that these two have, but Ilsa does not say, "I love you." And she really damn should, because this guy's way better than Rick. Anyways, Victor heads off to his meeting, and Ilsa sneaks out to go see Rick. Now, to be fair to Rick, he does have his moments, generally when there isn't a woman around. And so, in a classic good news, bad news, we once again see him doing a nice thing in taking care of his staff while the place is shut down. But at that, he discovers Ilsa waiting for him, and it's finally time for these two to have it out. Now, this is a great scene, and it really ought to be, considering that when you think about it, this most famous of romances really doesn't have that many scenes between the two romantic leads. And one of the things that makes this scene so great is the way that it builds. Rick has the letters, and Ilsa needs them. That is just a great tension. And so we have a succession of approaches. First, she says it's for a great cause. Nothing. Then she tries to call on their past feelings for each other. That's counterproductive. Third, she insults him, but that seems to hurt her as much as it hurts him. Finally, she threatens him with a gun, but Rick says she'd be doing him a favor. Rick is so heartbroken, so beaten by the pain of being left by this woman, that he now wishes for death. And she, of course, aches for him as well. And so she can't shoot him, and these two collapse into each other's arms. And famously, as soon as they kiss, we cut to a shot of a great, big, shining, arguably phallic-shaped lighthouse. And well, when we cut back, there's a different feel, less of a build-up, one might say. And this has led to a lot of suggestion as to what this 1942 film was getting at with that edit. But anyways, we're approaching what we often term the low point. But you might notice that things are looking up for Rick, at least superficially, because the low point is not necessarily when things are worst for the protagonist, but the nadir of the main argument of the film. And so Ilsa tells Rick that she can't leave him again, and it's up to him what happens. Victor and the waiter Carl burst in downstairs, hiding from the police, and Victor and Rick begin talking. Here, Victor only strengthens the counter-argument further, while at the same time also being the ultimate role model for Rick, should he choose to recognize it. But moments ago, Rick was willing to condemn Ilsa and Victor to the purgatory of Casablanca, and one must imagine eventual death, rather than let Ilsa go. Here, Victor shows Rick true selflessness. He tells Rick that he can take Ilsa to America, that he only cares for her safety and happiness.
You love her that much?
Apparently you think of me only as a leader of a cause. Well, I'm also a human being. Yes, I love her that much.
Monsieur Laszlo,
Yes?
you'll come with us. We have a warrant for your arrest.
On what charge?
Captain Renault will discuss that with you later.
It seems that destiny has taken a hand.
So, Rick might just let Victor, this inspirational resistance hero, this beacon of free Europe, rot and die in Casablanca while he retreats to the safety of American shores with the woman he loves. And our overall Act 2 tension of, will Victor get the letters before something befalls him, has been answered. He will not. Things are looking bad, and so, with 14 minutes left, we enter Act 3. Act 3 has a false resolution and a true resolution, and you will rarely see that so clearly as here in Casablanca, as we spend 7 minutes with Rick suggesting he's going to do something else, before spending the final 7 minutes with him, well, doing the most iconic climactic actions in all of film history, and saying some of the most iconic lines of the 20th century in any medium. Anyways, we're now wondering some version of the question, will Rick really leave Victor for dead? And so, we see Rick make plans with Louis, and it seems for all the world, he really is going to do just that. And then, he agrees to sell his cafe to Ferrari, so there's no way back at this point. At that, it's night and the plan is in action. Louis arrives at the bar, hides, and then Ilsa and Victor arrive right behind him. This is all going exactly as Rick had told Louis, and Louis pops out to arrest Victor. And, as Louis puts it so brilliantly and succinctly, as his character puts everything, love, it seems, has triumphed over virtue. Now, most people enjoy when a film says its own title, and I do too, but boy oh boy do I love when a film manages to outline its argument-counter-argument structure in such a clever way. But of course, Louis is the counter-argument, and it's wrong. A lost love has in fact re-inspired a lost virtue, and Rick now reveals his actual plan. Pulling a gun on Louis, he tells him to call the airport and make ready. Of course, being the sly fox that he is, Louis rings Strasser instead, and so we've now got one hell of a final sequence, as we wonder, will Rick get on that plane with Ilsa, and will they do it before Strasser can stop them? And so we enter one all-timer of a true resolution. The party soon arrive at the airport. Bear in mind, we're 7 minutes from the end here. God, I miss films that knew how to end. Victor goes to load the plane, and Rick tells Louis to put Victor's and Ilsa's names on the letters. And then we just have 1 whole minute of the most quoted dialogue ever to be said. It's insane.
If that plane leaves the ground and you're not with him, you'll regret it. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon and for the rest of your life.
But what about us?
We'll always have Paris. We didn't have, we lost it until you came to Casablanca. We got it back last night.
When I said I would never leave you.
And you never will. But I've got a job to do too. Where I'm going, you can't follow. What I've got to do, you can't be any part of.
Victor returns and, learning at least something of the full story, welcomes Rick back to the fight. Rick has finally joined Victor and loses his one true love in the process. He says goodbye to Ilsa, and the married couple get on the plane together. Sadly, General Strasser, who cares not for beans, arrives and looks to stop the getaway. Rick is left with no choice but to shoot him. The French guard arrive, and, iconic line alert, Louis tells them to round up the usual suspects. It appears that just as Victor Laszlo and Ilsa inspired Rick, he too has inspired Louis Renault. There's not much left for them but trouble in Casablanca, so they head off down a foggy runway toward an uncertain but now open future. And there's one last iconic line for good measure, as Rick offers to the captain and to the world, Louis, I think this could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. La Marseillaise is bridged into the Star-Spangled Banner, France and America are joining forces, and Casablanca ends triumphantly. They don't make them like that anymore. So, there's 2 things I'd like to talk about with Casablanca, and they are basically both about why Casablanca really is one of the all-time greats and some kind of contender for greatest film of all time. The first is the nature of the protagonist. Rick Blaine is one of, if not the, most famous protagonist in film history, and there's a few things to explore within that. First of all, as an all-time great protagonist, he's often not driving the action. He's barely in our sequence 3, and his position remains somewhat stagnant throughout much of Act 2, which is why I believe the want of this film is maybe Victor's. Victor's objective holds, but develops throughout Act 2. Meet Ugarte, get out of meeting with the authorities unscathed, get letters from the black market, get the letters from Rick, and finally convince Rick to leave with Ilsa. His micro-objective changes with the sequences. This is what gives the story its dynamism. So here I'd like to talk about the nature of Rick's character and his journey. Rick's starting point as a character could be the low point in another kind of story. He refuses to help someone as he's dragged off by Nazis, insisting that he sticks his neck out for nobody. He is selfish, cynical, and uninterested in the world around him. So Rick's is a journey to become the opposite of this: selfless, hopeful, and concerned for the greater good. So what I find great about Rick's transformation is that it has that, Hemingway quality I love so much. How does Rick change? First gradually, then suddenly. First, he doesn't realize Ilsa has arrived, then meets her again, then gets rotten drunk and feels sorry for himself, then hates himself for being a sorry and miserable bastard of a drunk. The next day, he learns that Ilsa was already married when she knew him, and as he tries to compute this, he finds himself helping a young woman who tells him she's thinking about sleeping with another man. But then, he tells Victor that he won't help him, and then refuses to help the woman he supposedly loves to escape to safety. So, up to this point, his change has been gradual, but it is there. With Ilsa's arrival, he starts to become vulnerable again, or as Louis says, human. Then, once Ilsa explains, and maybe more importantly, once he's actually ready to hear her out, Rick feels loved again, and worthwhile. With love in his life, he can aspire to goodness again, and he sees what real goodness looks like in a Victor Laszlo that would sacrifice his own life to allow another man to leave with his wife for her safety. And with this combination, Rick's change comes suddenly, compellingly, and convincingly. If he loves Ilsa, can't he do what Victor would do? In a world where he's worth loving, shouldn't he do the right thing, even if it means giving up that love? And so, really here, the low point of Casablanca isn't the low point for Rick's character, but it's actually the strongest point for the counter-argument. The point that Rick could just act on the way he felt at the beginning of the story and get everything he wanted in the process. And that brings me to my second point. What makes Casablanca truly great? First of all, I love any film that can really pull off this double helix effect, where the protagonist's want appears to be at hand and it seems a disaster for their need. Only then the two wrap around each other again, and the character gives up or loses what they want and finally attains their need in the process. The fact that Casablanca achieves this so masterfully, so dramatically, and in such a tight third act is just exemplary. But there's something else in that as well. This is so compelling because the want and the need are so mutually exclusive of each other, and both have such strong cases to be made for them. I've said this before, but I think so many films these days are lackluster because they either don't fully believe in the arguments they're making, or they regard their arguments as so self-evident that they don't really test them, and so they present a dull, limp, or frankly bullshit counter-argument. Now, Casablanca is really a melodrama, but that is what gives it its power because it's hard to overplay what is really at stake here. This is love and war. This is life and death. This is freedom versus fascism. This is World War II. And Casablanca is not shy about that. The Nazis are trying to dominate. The French official is prevaricating and playing both sides. The Italians Ugarte and Ferrari have been corrupted by desperation or opportunism. The Czechoslovakian is trying to escape Nazi domination. The Scandinavians are in need of assistance. And the American is totally disinterested and trying to numb himself rather than face what's really going on. As Rick says, if it's December 1941 in Casablanca, what time is it in New York? I bet they're asleep in New York. I bet they're asleep all over America. When we look back now at World War II, it's kind of taken for granted that the US would get involved, but it certainly wasn't a given at the time. There were clear arguments and counter-arguments to be made. You hear not dissimilar cases being made today, but imagine how much more extreme both sides of the argument must have been in December 1941. And Casablanca makes those arguments, but not politically. Casablanca presents the arguments in a love story. Casablanca was a call to heroism, a call to do the difficult thing for the right reasons. And when it does so, it's catching. Victor inspires Ilsa. Ilsa inspires Rick. Rick inspires Louis. And Casablanca, in its melodramatic, soaring thematic argument and all-time character arc, inspires all of us. That's what makes it great. Or, maybe it's just war propaganda. This has been Mark Overanalyzes Film on Casablanca. Next time, 'tis the season to go home and get your fucking shine box. It's Goodfellas. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, rate, follow, recommend, and whatever else it is that's good for this kind of thing. A special thanks to Mary Kate O'Flanagan, who taught me everything I know about film, including these methods. Thanks for listening, take care of yourselves, and see you soon.